She stood frozen in the hallway of her own home, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hand, while her son's voice drifted through the crack in the study door. "I don't care what it takes. Get me the doctor's name by Friday. She's already forgetting things. That's not a lie. We just need someone to write it down, officially." Evelyn Walker had spent 30 years building something from nothing. She had scrubbed floors until her knuckles bled. She had slept in her car more nights than she could count. She had poured every dime, every dream, every broken piece of herself into a business that now employed over 400 people. And she had done it all for him, for Brandon, her only child, the boy she had promised to protect no matter what. And now that boy was on the phone, calmly orchestrating her removal. 6 months, Max, Brandon continued, his voice so casual it made her stomach turn. "Once the psychiatric evaluation is filed, the court will appoint me as trustee. She won't even know what hit her. The retirement home in Hendersonville is already on standby. It's nice. She'll be comfortable." Evelyn didn't drop the coffee cup. She didn't gasp. She didn't make a sound. Instead, she did what she had always done when life tried to break her. She stood perfectly still and let the information settle into her bones. And then she turned around, walked back to the kitchen, poured the cold coffee down the sink, and started to plan. "Before we continue, remember that this is still a small channel, and I could really use your support. Please like the video and subscribe. It's free, and it helps more than you know." Evelyn Whitfield was born in a small town in eastern Kentucky, a place called Morgan's Hollow that most maps didn't even bother to mark. Her father worked the coal mines 60 hours a week, and her mother took in sewing from the wives of the men who owned the company store. They lived in a house that leaned slightly to the left, with a porch that sagged in the middle, and a roof that let the rain in every spring. But Evelyn never thought of herself as poor. She thought of herself as lucky because she had parents who loved her, and that was more than some kids had. She was 12 when her father's lungs gave out. Black lung disease, the doctor called it. The company called it a pre-existing condition and refused to pay a cent of the medical bills. Her mother tried to fight them, wrote letters, made phone calls, sat in waiting rooms for hours. But nothing worked. 6 months after the diagnosis, her father was gone. And 3 years after that, her mother followed. Cancer this time, the kind that eats you from the inside out. Evelyn was 15 when she became an orphan. She buried her mother in the small cemetery behind the Baptist church, using money she had saved from babysitting and cleaning houses after school. She stood alone at the grave, wearing a dress that was 2 sizes too big, and made a promise. She would not stay here. She would not die in this town. She would not let the coal company or the cancer or the poverty win. She would leave, and she would never come back. At 17, Evelyn scraped together enough money for a Greyhound ticket to Nashville. She had never been to Nashville. She knew no one there, but she had heard that the city was growing, that there were jobs for people who weren't afraid to work hard. And Evelyn was not afraid of hard work. Hard work was the only language she had ever known. For the first 2 years, she worked 3 jobs. She cleaned office buildings at night, waited tables at a diner during the day, and on weekends she cooked. She cooked the way her mother had taught her. Biscuits from scratch, gravy with real cream, fried chicken that took 2 days to prepare, collard greens simmered with ham hock until they melted on your tongue. She cooked to remember. She cooked to survive. She cooked because it was the only thing that made her feel close to home. It was at the diner where she met Travis Holt. He came in every morning at 6, ordered black coffee and eggs over easy, and always left a tip that was exactly $1. He was a musician, or at least he said he was. He played guitar at a bar on 2nd Avenue and talked about the record deal that was just around the corner. Evelyn was 19, tired, lonely, and desperate for someone to see her as more than a waitress in a stained apron. Travis saw her. He told her she was beautiful. He told her she was special. He told her that one day he would take her away from all of this. She believed him. When she found out she was pregnant, she went to his apartment with tears in her eyes, half afraid and half hopeful. She thought maybe this would be the thing that made him commit. That made them real. Travis sat on his worn-out couch and stared at the wall for a long time. Then he stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. "I'm not ready for this," he said. "I'm sorry." He left Nashville that same week. A friend told Evelyn he had moved to Austin. She never saw him again. Evelyn didn't have time to fall apart. She was 7 months pregnant, still working, still showing up every day. But her body was giving out. Years of poor nutrition, long hours, and relentless stress had left her fragile. She went into labor 2 months early, alone in a city hospital that smelled like bleach and despair. The baby came fast, but it was too early. He was too small. The doctors worked for hours, but there was nothing they could do. Evelyn's son was born and died on the same cold February night. She didn't cry when they told her. She didn't scream. She lay in the hospital bed with her hands on her empty stomach and felt something break inside her that she would never be able to fix. But in the bed next to hers, separated by a thin curtain, was a woman who was losing her own battle. Her name was Charlotte Pearson. She was 23 years old, alone, and dying from an infection that had spread through her body after a complicated delivery. Her baby boy, born just hours earlier, was healthy. He was perfect, and he was about to become an orphan. Charlotte begged the nurses to bring Evelyn to her bedside. She had heard Evelyn crying through the curtain. She knew what Evelyn had lost. And in her last lucid moment, she reached out and grabbed Evelyn's hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong for a woman with so little time left. "Please," Charlotte whispered, "take my son. His father is gone. I have no family. He has no one. Don't let him be alone in this world. Don't let him be forgotten." Charlotte died that night. Evelyn, still weak from her own delivery, still grieving, looked at the baby boy in the hospital bassinet. He was crying. He was alive. And something in Evelyn's chest, the part she thought had died with her own child, began to beat again. She signed the adoption papers 3 weeks later. She named him Brandon, after her father. And she made him the same promise she had made at her mother's grave. "You will never be alone. I will give you everything. I will build a life so strong that nothing will ever tear it apart." Evelyn kept that promise the only way she knew how. She worked. She worked until her hands were raw and her back ached and her eyes burned from exhaustion. She started a small catering business from her kitchen, cooking the recipes her mother had taught her. She took every job she could get: church potlucks, birthday parties, office luncheons. She charged less than anyone else and delivered more than anyone expected. Her big break came from a woman named Margaret Ashford, a wealthy socialite who hired Evelyn to cater a garden party for 50 guests. Evelyn arrived at 6 in the morning with 3 coolers full of food. She served fried chicken that was perfectly golden, biscuits so light they seemed to float, banana pudding that people talked about for weeks. Margaret Ashford pulled Evelyn aside at the end of the night and wrote her a check for double the agreed amount. "You have a gift," Margaret said, "and you're wasting it on garden parties. Open a restaurant. I'll be your first investor." Evelyn opened Mama Walker's Kitchen 6 months later. It was a small space in East Nashville, with 12 tables and a kitchen so hot you could barely breathe in the summer. But people came, and they came back, and they brought their friends. Within 5 years, Mama Walker's had expanded to 3 locations. Within 10, it was 15. By the time Brandon turned 18, Evelyn Walker was worth over $8 million. She bought a house in Belle Meade, the kind of house she used to clean when she was a teenager. She drove a car that didn't break down every other week. She sent Brandon to the best private school in the state, where he wore a blazer with a crest on the pocket and learned to speak with the kind of confidence that money buys. But somewhere in the middle of all that success, Evelyn made a mistake. She gave Brandon everything except the one thing that mattered most. She gave him privilege without perspective, comfort without context. She protected him from every struggle, every hardship, every lesson that comes from falling and having to get back up. She thought she was loving him. She was actually starving him. Brandon grew up believing that money appeared from nowhere, that success was an inheritance rather than a choice, that the world owed him something because his mother had earned it. He went to college, dropped out after 2 years because he found it boring. He started a business, failed, and blamed the market. He moved back into his mother's house at 27, driving a car she had bought him, living in a house she had paid for, and nursing a quiet resentment that he couldn't quite name. When Evelyn brought Brandon into the company as vice president of operations, she thought she was giving him purpose. She thought the responsibility would finally make him grow up. She spent 18 months teaching him everything she knew, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to manage the books, how to read a profit and loss statement, how to lead people without breaking their spirit. He smiled and nodded and took notes, and all the while he was watching her age, watching her forget where she put her keys, watching the small cracks that appear in every person over time. He saw opportunity where a son should have seen concern. The conspiracy began quietly. Brandon found a doctor who was willing to write a questionable evaluation for enough money. He hired an attorney who specialized in guardianship cases. He started documenting everything. Every time Evelyn misplaced her glasses, every time she repeated herself, every time she forgot a name. He kept a file on his laptop, carefully curated, carefully distorted. A pattern of incompetence that didn't exist, built from small moments that every 62-year-old experiences. On the surface, he was the perfect son. He brought her coffee in the morning. He kissed her cheek before bed. He told her he loved her every single day. And every single day, he was preparing to take everything from her. Evelyn overheard the phone call on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. She had come home early from a meeting, feeling tired, and was walking past the study when she heard Brandon's voice through the door. She stopped, she listened, and her world shattered into pieces she hadn't known could break again. But Evelyn Walker had been broken before. She had buried parents, lost a child, been abandoned, gone hungry, slept in her car, and started from absolute zero. She knew something that Brandon had never learned. She knew how to survive. She did not confront him that day. She did not cry. She did not throw him out. Instead, she smiled at breakfast the next morning, kissed his cheek, and told him she loved him. And then she called Robert Chen, the best corporate attorney in Nashville, and set a plan in motion. For the next 3 months, Evelyn played a role. She pretended to forget conversations. She repeated questions she had already asked. She left the stove on by accident. She called Brandon by the wrong name once or twice, just enough to make him smile with satisfaction. She fed his narrative, while Robert Chen quietly conducted a forensic audit of the company's finances. What they found was staggering. Brandon and a corrupt accountant named Marcus Webb had siphoned nearly $400,000 from the company through fake vendor accounts. They had created a shell company that charged Walker restaurants for services that were never rendered. And they had already secured 2 doctors who were willing to testify that Evelyn was no longer competent to manage her own affairs. But Robert Chen had also found something else. Evidence that Brandon had been planning this for over 2 years. Emails, text messages, a detailed timeline. It was all documented, all preserved, all ready to be presented at exactly the right moment. The board meeting was called for a cold Thursday morning in January. Brandon had orchestrated it himself. He had invited the board members, the company's top executives, and the lawyers. He had prepared a presentation. He had arranged for a psychiatrist to be present, ready to deliver the evaluation that would seal his mother's fate. He was confident, he was calm, he was about to win. He didn't see that his mother had arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in a sharp navy suit, her white hair perfectly styled, her eyes clear and steady. He didn't see her walk into the conference room and take her seat at the head of the table. He didn't see the folder Robert Chen placed in front of her, thick with documents and evidence. When Brandon walked into the room and saw his mother sitting there, composed and alert, he stopped cold. Something flickered across his face. Confusion. Then fear. "Mom," he said, "I didn't expect you to come." "I know you didn't," Evelyn replied, her voice calm and steady. "But I thought I should be here. After all, this meeting is about me, isn't it?" Brandon tried to regain control. He opened his presentation. He showed the board the notes he had compiled, the doctor's reports, the evidence of his mother's supposed decline. He spoke with confidence, but his voice was thin. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know what. When he finished, there was silence. The board members looked at each other, and then Robert Chen stood up. "I have a few documents to present," he said. "And then I think we'll have a clearer picture of what's actually happening at Walker Restaurants." He laid out the forensic audit in precise, damning detail. The fake vendor accounts, the shell company, the $400,000, the timeline of the conspiracy. He showed the board emails that Brandon had sent to Marcus Webb, laying out the plan step by step. He presented the text messages where Brandon referred to his mother as the old horse and joked about the retirement home he had picked out. The room turned cold. Brandon's face went white. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Evelyn stood up. She walked around the table slowly until she was standing directly in front of her son. She looked at him for a long moment, and in her eyes there was no anger. There was only a deep, profound sadness that seemed to come from somewhere far older than her 62 years. "There's something you need to know," she said. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." She told him the truth. She told him about the night in the hospital, about the baby she lost, about Charlotte Pearson, about the adoption. She told him that the blood running through his veins wasn't hers, but that it had never mattered. She told him that she had chosen him, that she had loved him not because she had to, but because she wanted to, that she had given him everything she had, and that he had repaid her by trying to steal the one thing she had built with her own broken hands. "You are not my son by blood," she said, "and after today, you are not my son by choice." She paused, her voice trembling just slightly. "I forgive you, Brandon, not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry this weight for the rest of my life. But forgiving you doesn't mean I will let you destroy what I built. You will face the consequences of what you've done, and you will start over from nothing, just like I did." Brandon tried to speak, tried to apologize, tried to explain. But Evelyn had already said everything she needed to say. She walked out of the room without looking back. The board voted unanimously to terminate Brandon's employment and pursue criminal charges. The money was recovered. The doctors who had been bribed recanted their evaluations. Brandon was convicted of fraud and sentenced to 3 years of probation, community service, and restitution. He lost everything: the apartment Evelyn had helped him buy, the car she had given him, the lifestyle he had never earned. He moved to a small town in West Tennessee and eventually opened a small diner of his own. A tiny place with 8 tables and a menu he cooked himself. Some say the work finally taught him what his mother had tried to teach him all along. But mother and son never reconciled. Some wounds are too deep for words. Evelyn lived another 14 years. She sold her majority stake in Walker Restaurants and used the proceeds to found the Walker Foundation, a non-profit that provides scholarships and startup grants to young people from poverty, especially those who had lost their parents. She personally met with every single grant recipient, sitting across from them at small tables in community centers, listening to their stories with the same patience her mother had once shown her. She died at 76, surrounded not by family, but by gratitude. Hundreds of young people came to her funeral. They stood in the rain and wept. They told stories about how she had changed their lives. They carried her casket to the grave, not because they were paid to do it, but because she had given them something worth carrying. And somewhere in West Tennessee, a man who had once been called her son closed his diner early that day. He sat in the back room, alone, and thought about the woman who had chosen him, the woman who had loved him, the woman he had tried to destroy. And he understood, too late, that the greatest tragedy was not that she had lost her fortune. It was that she had given him everything, and he had never understood what it cost her. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that starting over is not a punishment. It's a second chance. Because some of the greatest legacies are born not from what we keep, but from what we are brave enough to let go.